Brent, the 56 is really coming along. A lot of work's been done on this baby.
It's a big day.
What's going to happen?
Well, we got a couple things to finish up in the interior. We're going to do that first while our hands are clean.
That's a great idea.
Headliner, carpet, do a little dash work. And then
we're making the dash 4.
We're making the dash. Yeah. We got just a couple things to do on the motor. We got to prime the oil system, put the distributor in, put the carburetor in, and then we're going to turn the key. We're going to do paper, rock, scissors.
No, you can turn the key. Brent's got a great tip for you when he talks about priming that oil system, an imperative step that you got to take before you fire that engine for the first time. He's got a great tip to show you how to do that. And we're both really excited to hear those horses gallop for the first time.
Yeah.
Should we just get to work and quit talking?
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's do it. There's a lot of stuff that has to be done to prep a headliner before it gets installed into a vehicle, and we're getting close to putting this one in, but we want to talk through the preparation of the headliner, also the tools you're going to need to do the install so you can get all your ducks in a row and your tools in a row. Well, Brent, lay it on us. What tools do we need to be ready to go with the headliner?
Starting with prepping the headliner, we're going to need a couple tape measures. One if you're by yourself. Two.
See how long we've been here? Is that the plan? Okay.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We'll need scissors. And since we have two people, we'll use two scissors. Once we get all the bows put into place, then we're going to take the headliner obviously into the car. We're going to need a little hammer to fasten the first bow that holds everything into place. It's different than the other 6, so we'll show you that when we get in there. We'll need a staple gun.
Now it's important, you made a point of pointing out pneumatic stapler, not a manual stapler.
Yeah, you just can't get enough. The tack strips that are in there are just like a hard plastic, and the manual stapler just will not penetrate it. So you definitely need a pneumatic stapler.
Okay.
And then we need a couple little push tools here to when we get in there, you'll see the track that this has to go up in behind, and we use that to kind of get it centered into place.
For tucking purposes?
For tucking purposes. And then we're going to need a heat gun.
Maybe the most important tool of the job.
Probably the most important tool, yep. You got to get all the wrinkles out. You got to get it all centered, and as you're working it in there, you got to warm it all up so all the wrinkles pull out. So that's it in there for getting the headliner in.
No,
before we put the headliner in this particular car has windlace, and this is a windlace. There's nothing real technical about it. It just goes in around the door, and obviously it's just to prevent some wind noise coming through there. But it just staples into the same tack strips that the headliner staples into, except these are around the door, not around the top of the windows.
And sequence of events being important.
Yeah, this has to go in before the headliner goes in, because there's the strip that holds the headliner in place goes over the top of this. So this had to go in first. Okay, so that's in.
You're gonna make a dress here because you like the color of your headliner so much you got extra fabric?
No, but if you really like it, you could make a sash out of it.
Oh, that would be way better.
But
that's not what it's really for.
No, every headliner comes with enough extra material to cover your visors, your sun visors, so they match the headliner. Otherwise, you're trying to find material to match the headliner to cover your sun visors. So every headliner that you get comes with an extra bunch of material to cover the headliner.
And our message out of this is, when you get these extra pieces, don't think they're just extra pieces and throw them out. So we're making a little joke out of it here, but you really got to make sure you hold on to these. Now, when we took the bows out, we did a couple of things that are important.
Yes.
One is there's tape on every bow indicating where it was in its position in the car, because they're width specific.
Okay, so when you take them out, it's absolutely imperative that you label them, where they came from. They're definitely width specific. They have to go in the exact same spot.
And not necessarily just big to small, because it depends on the shape of the vehicle.
The contour of the
you can't rely on a pyramid shape or anything like that. Now, they look a lot better than they did when they came out, because we did a little prep work there as well.
Yep, that's another thing that you need to do is just take a scuff pad, and it has to be able, the headliner has to be able to slide on these bows, because when you center it, you have to be able to move it on the bows. If it sticks, it's going to bunch up in some spots. So you just take a scuff pad and just clean the rust off a little bit. If they're really bad, you can get them replaced. They make stainless steel ones. I'm sure they make carbon steel ones, but it gets a little expensive.
And these were fine.
Yeah, these were in pretty good shape.
So we're sticking with them.
Yeah.
All right, so what we did when we came in here is we were sliding in number 1. This is the front of the vehicle. So I bet number 2 would be next.
Number 2's next. You're smart, Troy.
I do what I can. All right, while I'm peeling this tape off of here, walk everybody through how this is gonna work.
All right, now the listing, this is called a listing right here. And the bow has to slide in through the listing. And the listing is cut a little bit long. So what you have to do is you slide the bow in, center it, and we'll use a tape measure to center it, and then we'll trim back. We need the listing to ride about right here, because as we stretch this material down, if we cut it too far back, it's going to sag in the corners. If we cut it too short, then it's going to bunch up on the ends. So you got to get it somewhere in this spot right here when everything is all said and done. That'll hold it tight up into the roof, and it'll keep it from bunching up on the ends.
All right, just give me a little slack on the fabric. Thank you, sir. All right. So it can be a little confusing because the first time you slide these in, the fabric is wider than the bow is long.
Quite a bit longer. All right, so I have to the edge 26 and a half.
I got 26 and 15 little lines. No, I got 27. So it should be 26 and 3/4.
So I come my way a quarter inch. Yep. And then we'll just, there you go. That's pretty close.
More?
No, that's pretty close. That's within one of them little lines.
Okay.
So, and it doesn't have to be perfect when you're doing this step. All we're trying to do is get the listing trimmed back to where it's usable, basically. So we're going to go back to there.
What, and then how much above that elbow in the bow are you making your cut?
About an inch.
Okay.
About an inch past the elbow, yeah. We'll just trim this out of there.
So think about what's going to happen here. When this gets installed, we're going to tension the fabric down the bows. So that's why there has to be a little bit of wiggle room from the end of the listing to the elbow, so there's room to pull that tight. But as Brent was saying, you don't want too much room. So now that he's set, I'm going to do the same snip on my end.
Now number 3 is the different one. This is the one that we're going to start with when we get it into the car. It doesn't have the little hooks here that actually hook into some brackets in the car. This goes into the center bow, the number 3 bow, goes into a tack strip type thing, and you actually have to fold the metal over the top of this. So when we get this one in, it's just a little bit different, but we'll show you that when we get in the car. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to keep working our way down, we're on number 3 right now. We're going to take number 4, do the exact same thing 4 more times, and then it'll be ready to move over to the car.
Second verse, third, fourth, fifth, all the way down. We'll just keep repeating the same operation.
Well, we're getting ready to install the headliner. Before we do, we're going to have this thing hanging here. You're not going to be able to see anything. So I'm just going to walk you through what we're going to do, the process that we're going to hang this headliner in here. First thing, that one oddball bow that doesn't have the 90-degree hook on it, that actually gets placed into these little hooks right here. And then we'll snap them into place and then take just a ball peen hammer and tap them down to lock it into place. And then from there, we take the rest of the bows have a 90-degree hook on it that actually will snap into these holes. If you notice, there's actually 2 holes, and there's 2 holes on each side. And what we'll do is we'll just snap those bows into place, just pick a hole. It doesn't make any difference. But as we're installing this, we may need to move one side or even both sides to get that thing tensioned right up against the roof. So once we get all the bows now snapped into these holes and these hooks, we come to the back, and there's similar hooks that we're hooking that number 3 bow into. There's similar hooks here. And we actually there's a piece of cardboard that's sewn into the headliner. We'll hook that to that, fold it down underneath, and then the rubber windshield gasket actually holds the headliner into place in the rear. So once the back's in, we move to the front. We do the same thing with the bows. We snap them into these hooks with the holes. And then once we get to the front, there's a tack strip in there that we'll pull the headliner tight, and we'll take that pneumatic stapler we talked about and actually staple it into place. We have to do the same thing along the side windows here. There's tack strips here that we're going to staple into place. Now when we start doing this, we're only going to put a couple staples in because we're probably going to have to pull those first ones out as we stretch that fabric out and pull the wrinkles out. But we're ready to actually start installing the headliner. Once we get in here, it's going to be a little bit hard to see. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of overview of what we're going to get, what we're going to get accomplished. So we're going to get started. I'm going to find George.
Well, Brent, I know you're in a band and you always wanted to be a headliner. Is this what you were talking about?
No.
Oh, okay. We're going to install a headliner. Before we get going on the headliner, here's an opportunity to talk about that wind lacing that you showed us earlier.
Yep, this is all it is right here. It's just that it's a foam rubber core wrapped in this fabric, and it's got a little tab on it that you staple into the tack strips. One of the things you have to make sure of is there's a tack strip there to staple to. I did have to replace some of them, but not all of them in here. I think this was restored sometime in the 80s, so some of them had been replaced then, and they were still good. So it just, you start on the front with the bracket and just work your way around and staple it into the tack strips and stretch it in there. There's not much to it, but it has to go in before this track goes in that holds the headliner above the door.
So sequence of events is important.
Yep, it's very important. It has to go in first.
Speaking of sequence of events, it's important, as we mentioned earlier, that we start in the right spot here. So one of the things we've already done is marked out a center position right here on the roof rib. So that's going to show us where the seam goes. And as Brent mentioned earlier, on this middle bow, it's going to grab onto these bars. So we're going to align our fabric center on the center of the rib. I'm going to go ahead and, there you go. He's engaged on his side. I'm going to put just a little bit of tension on that fabric before I engage on the hook. We're good to go there. And then he can work to his right, and I can work to my left, doing the same thing. Rinse and repeat. No, we're not done yet, right, Brent?
No, we got to take our little ball peen hammer here, and we're just going to tap these to lock that bow into place.
All right, this one's done, right?
That one's done.
All right, so let's see if we can get some of this
Wait, that's not. This one. This one we got to get out
out
of.
of our way. Right?
All right, so now these get snapped into, pick a hole.
And at this point, it's absolutely random.
Yeah.
Top hole, bottom
Yeah.
hole, we're just gonna
Just got to snap it into
see how
place.
she goes.
Well, we're to the back of the headliner here, and now we've got to do something a little bit different. There's the cardboard that I talked about that's sewn into the headliner, and there's tabs here. Now we just have to take that cardboard, fold it underneath the tabs, and just kind of roll it underneath there. So that's what we're going to do now, and then we're going to move forward from that odd bow. We're going to head to the front of the car. So we're going to hook this, fold that way. Get that hooked under that one, and under that one.
All right.
Now eventually there's trim that goes on here, and then this rubber is going to get pulled up over the top too. But now we can move forward, going ahead and attach it to the front bows, just like we did going backwards. I kicked George out of the car, give me a little bit more room to work. I went and got the air stapler, the heat gun, and the tuck-in tools. I'm going to start at the back of the car, take the air stapler here, and we're going to just start pulling this thing. You got to be very, very patient with it. I'm going to pull this toward the tack strip, staple it into place, and then just remember that you may need to take these first few staples out to re-stretch it. But we're gonna go ahead and pull this thing down in here. Get a couple dots in here. All right, now we got it stapled in there. Now what we're gonna have to do is just start with the heat gun and start pulling those wrinkles out of there. Be very, very careful with the heat gun. Be very careful with the heat gun because obviously it's 1,000 degrees coming out of here if you turn it on high, and you can definitely destroy a headliner. So be really, really careful and patient. So I'm going to leave those a little bit right there. We'll probably have to come back to that as we start moving forward. We're going to have to backtrack a little bit. So I'm just going to move over to the other side, do the same thing, and start working it that way, and then we'll start working forward. Well, we got the back pretty close. It's all tacked to the side above the windows there. There's a couple wrinkles yet that we need to warm up and iron out, but we're going to keep moving forward. And the next step is over the door. Now there's that steel tack strip underneath there that we got to tuck this headliner up underneath. So we're going to take our our little plastic tuck-in tool here, and we're just gonna start working that in underneath that strip. And be very, very patient. We're gonna start pulling and tucking and pulling and tucking. And we've got another another putty knife here that if this one gets a little too thick in spots, it's a little thinner. But we're just gonna keep tucking this thing in until we get all the way to the front. And then we'll grab the stapler again. There's a tack strip above the windshield that will staple this to when we get that far. But for now, we're just gonna work this, pulling and tucking and pulling and tucking. And it's just, you just gotta be really patient with it because you can really mess it up in a hurry if you get too anxious with it, if you get too excited. So, and all the wrinkles there, there's some wrinkles on the top, they'll all just heat right out as soon as we get this thing tucked up into place. Now on this corner here, we're gonna have to take a scissors and make a relief cut because it's not gonna fold in there nice. So what we'll do is we'll get it close. And I've got my scissors here. Just gonna take and cut some of this back. This side's getting pretty close. What I need to do now is move over to the other side, do the same thing, get this thing tucked in. And then before we staple that, we'll get this tucked all the way up in once we get all these wrinkles out of here. So I'm gonna move over to the other side and do the same thing. Well, the sides above the doors here are all tucked in to that tack strip. And now we've got to do the front. And like the side windows, there's a tack strip that you actually have to staple into above the windshield. So what I'm gonna do now is just pull this thing tight and start stapling it across while I'm pulling it tight, and then we'll take the heat gun and warm these wrinkles up out of it. So I just got to pull that tight there. We'll start in the center. And then once this is all in, the windshield trim, there's interior windshield trim that's going to help hold this all down. So it's not relying on the staples to hold this thing in place. This is just to keep it tacked in there until we get the trim in place. Now in the corners here, we're going to have to backtrack a little bit and pull this out and tuck it a little more in. Well, we've gotten this thing about as far as we can take it today. A few wrinkles that we're going to heat out, re-work those corners like I said, and then we're going to leave it just like this with the fabric hanging down and stuff because we can't really finish it until we start putting all the interior trim in. We want to be able to use the door panels have to go on first, then the interior window trim's got to go on, and that covers up the edge of those seams. But I tell you, just take your time, a little patience, and you can put a headliner in.
We've got some dashboard components laying here, and we've talked a lot about how user-friendly this wiring system is. The harness parts are labeled. We've got a schematic we're going to show you. So it makes this pretty simple, but we got to do something first.
Yep.
You got a bad spot there. And what a great lesson this is in you can buy anything for these vehicles. So here's the replacement lens, pretty straightforward stuff.
There we go. So if you ever wanted to know what the inside of a dash cluster of a 1956 Chevy looked like,
We're going to leave the gasket behind.
yep.
Out with the old. Should we do it reverse? Just all right, I'll tighten the screws, Brent. Why don't you talk about how we're going to do this wiring?
Well, some of them are painfully easy. We've got our wiring diagram here. This one that goes to the generator light has already got a connector on it. All we need to do is plug a light into it So plug a light bulb into it and just snap it right into the back. So that one's done. The rest of them aren't quite so easy, but not bad. Everything, like George said, everything is labeled. All the wires are labeled. We've got a good schematic here that I'm going to turn around so we can read it. So let's start with the instrument lamps these three right here.
Okay, so what it tells us on the schematic, what we want to show you here are some techniques for putting these parts together. Because the bottom line is that every vehicle is going to have a slightly different schematic program, so it doesn't pay to go through the minutia of how this one connects, but you do need to know how to solder, and you do need to know how to make certain connections on here that are going to be similar from vehicle to vehicle. So in this case, all three of these bulbs, according to our schematic, end up tied together to that input. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to start by wrapping the braided wire together. What's that stuff, Brent? Looks like insulation.
Yeah, shrink tube. So once we make the solder connection, there's going to be a big fat chunk of metal sitting there that we have to obviously cover up. So that is going to cover that. And there's different sizes of it. The red is one size, there's a smaller black one, another black one. Okay, so you've got that one.
And basically what we're doing here is just creating a splice, an inline splice. Now we're going to get into a state of flux. So flux is a material that's got a little acid in it. It's going to clean the wire to ensure that the solder can stick to it. And I love this little torch that Brent's using.
Like secret agent, man, right? Okay,
Exactly.
so I prefer to use a micro torch versus soldering gun because it's instant heat.
I'm going to turn this way so it's a little more easy.
That would be good. So you want to heat the wires, not the solder. There's a lot of wire there, so it's going to take a little bit to get through there. Okay, so now once this is all smoothed over and it's turned silver, you can't see the copper anymore. You've got a beautiful, beautiful solder joint there.
However, the shrink stuff is heat sensitive.
Yeah,
so we want to give that a second to cool down before we slide that up. So let's do another fitting. We're going to give that a chance to cool, but to keep this show moving. Now a different style is on this harness, this wire is going to feed one of our turn signal indicators. So this is in the dash cluster here, and I'm making sure I got the right one.
Need one of those?
So this feeds simply directly into the socket. And then the thing that Brent's snipping on over here is what ends up being the positive terminal that the bulb itself is going to go up against.
And that's just going to crimp on there. Got a really good crimp right there. So that's not coming apart. So now that gets tucked into there. We get a bulb put into there. And that one's ready to go. So that just gets snapped into there. Maybe.
All right, so our shrink wrap is going to slide over that. All right, now we're to a point where that solder fitting is about there. And this is pretty cool stuff. A lot of stuff, when you expose it to heat, it expands. In this case, the shrink wrap, oddly enough, shrinks when you expose it to heat, and it'll conform around those wires, keep them very, very well protected. When that connection is taken care of, we can bulb these and install them. Now there's another style of connection
Couple.
that gets used on these things. Yeah, we still want to show you a ground and then just a push-on connector. In this case, the sleeve Brent's sliding on there is a friction fit. It's not a heat-sensitive sleeve. So once that's slid on, then we can put that back together. Now, go ahead and start on those last terminals. That's kind of a cool assembly that you've got cooking there.
Yeah. All right, so we got to find well, I guess they call this orange, but we'll double check it. It says gas gauge on there, so we're going to go to the fuel gauge.
That goes over the top of that.
And then it's kind of cool, what finishes everything, it's a friction fit onto the stud sticking out of the back of the gauge, is once that white cap slides down, it's going to close the brass onto the stud.
You on it? There you
There.
go.
Happy as a clam. Well, as you can see, this is pretty straightforward stuff to do, but there are some keys. One, follow the schematic. Two, pay attention to the print that's on the wire. And Brent's got a good point about these molded plugs, which is,
Yeah, when you look at the schematic, sometimes it shows them in a different order than what they are on here. So make sure you're following the color codes and what it says on the wire.
more so than the position.
More so
in the
than
molded plug.
what this shows, yeah.
And then we've got a handful of different connection styles that we showed you. So although your schematic is different, understanding how to do the soldering, how to make these other connections is what's going to give you a successful connection here to your dashboard. Don't forget to shrink wrap your solder connections to make sure they're going to stand up over time. Any other last minute tips?
Nope, let's get it
Where
finished
can
up.
people find that little torch like you're using?
Yeah, you can get it at any home center, even auto parts stores. What I liked about this one, why I chose this one, I've got a couple different micro torches actually, but this one you can actually hold like a pencil. You got a ton of control with it, so you just pinpoint that flame right where you need it. It's just a lot easier to control, so works very well.
Really did a great job, all right? Follow those tips. Your wiring is going to be all set in no time at all.
Well, we got the instrument cluster all ready to put back in. When we got done wiring it, we just took a little friction tape, wrapped the wires up together and put them, there's actually a clip there to hold the wires. So now I'm going to go ahead and put it into the dash. There's no magic to it. Just take your time so you don't scuff up the edges of it. Feed the wires through. There's 4 screws that hold this particular one in. And then when we get this thing all put in there, we got to get underneath there and plug there's 3 connectors. As you can see, there's 3 connectors right here. They're all different, and there's connectors just like that, the opposite side of that coming off the fuse panel. So we're going to slide that into place. Wire tucked in. All right, now we got to just get underneath there and plug those 3 wire harnesses in, and 2 more pieces of chrome, tighten the steering column up, and that dash is pretty well ready to go.
We're getting ready to make the interior of this car look a whole lot better than it does, and that's going to be by putting the carpet in. So one of the things we did to get ready for this is we took the carpet outside, and it had all sorts of creases in it just from being shipped in a box, and we stretched it out over the roof of another vehicle, and we let it sit in the sun, and that helped it relax quite a bit. And laying in the sun helps you relax too, doesn't it, Brent?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I thought so. So now, again, this is a product that is vehicle specific. So it should probably be with the front toward the front though.
Fits better.
So it's designed to fit this car, oversized. So we're gonna have to do a little trimming. And one of the things that you can maybe see is there's some ridges in here that are more than just the factory or the shipping creases. There's some spots in here that are supposed to be in here because down in the middle of the floor there's a high spot that the seat goes onto, and really that's what this is right here. That's the edge of the high spot for the seat. Notice that there's no glue under this. Once it's in place, it's going to be held in place by the seats and by other pieces of molding. I got to go up probably another inch.
Yeah, more than that probably.
So what I'm doing is I feel over this hump in the floor as I'm getting these ridges in the carpet aligned with that hump. It's not unlike putting a carpet in a room. And then another trick that'll help you is that you can take a heat gun to the carpet. You want to take it to the back, and that's going to help us work some of these shipping creases out up here, which I would say we're about ready to do, huh? Mm-hmm. Peel back here. Kind of the prevailing theme here is that this is a race that goes to the slow and steady, not the swift. So you just got to be patient, keep manipulating the carpet and the pad. Get it to settle down and relax a little. That's better. Let's flip and look. One thing we did, because I would have been bumping my head on it all the time, is we took the steering wheel out to provide a little more working room. I think we would need to do a little slice and dice so that we can see a little better where we're at here.
Now, one of the tricks too you can use is 3M makes some stuff called ribbon sealer, and it's just a rope of caulk about maybe 3/8 of an inch thick, and it's very, very sticky. You can put that up in the corners and just kind of press it into place with that, and it'll help hold the corners down. And then when you get the kick panel in place, that holds the corners in the front, and the back seat will hold the back down. And then we've got sill plates when we get this all cut into place that we're going to put on the edges here. I think we're ready to trim it a little bit because I think it's in the right spot.
Yeah. All right, so here's a trick you can do. We'll have a look at this inside corner back here. And there is going to be a door panel that comes down and captures over the top of the carpet here. So you've got a little bit of wiggle room. It's kind of like putting base molding in your house if you've ever trimmed out your house after carpet's in. But what we want to do is keep it as close as possible. So I'm going to use a knife, putty knife, and that's going to help me really push this into the inside corner. And then with my utility knife, I'm going to allow the blade of the knife to travel along the blade of the putty knife. So it just helps define the cutting line for me. In talking about that interior panel, also is an opportunity to talk about sequence of events, because one thing leads to another here. We get the carpet in, then we get the panel in, and there's trim that we've mentioned earlier that goes up onto the headliner. So we have to do all of that stuff in the right order of operations so that each part covers the other. One trim done. What we'll do with this carpet is keep working on the trimming. We're going to let it lay in place, and just time and a little bit of gravity is going to also help work some of these wrinkles out as we continue to work on them. We're going to keep doing our trims. Do you have these thresholds, Andy, where we can have a look at them?
Right behind you. Right on the bench here.
Just because I think that these are so cool. And again, it goes back to speaking to the idea that you can buy pretty much anything for these cars that you're working on. And again, especially if you've got a mainstream vehicle like this one that we're doing. But when we're all done, we got this trim done. That's going to come out here. It's going to capture the carpet out here inside the door. And it's also going to really look great. I know it goes the other way. I always wanted them to read the Fisher on there. So once that's in place, it's going to help hold the carpet down. It's really going to look good. Again, Brent and I have said over and over with the headliner, with the dashboard work, with the body work, a lot of patience. Take your time. Make sure that you get it right. You don't want to cut the carpet in correctly because that's a big step backward. And when you're done, it's going to really look great. Should we keep manipulating here, Brent?
Yes.
You are a good manipulator. Well, Brent, I don't know about you, but I think it'd be a really good idea when it rains if water can't get inside the car. And I think that's what this next step is all about, huh?
It's a better idea not to drive a car like that in the rain, but that doesn't always work.
So you've got some weather strip at hand here.
do.
And there's a right and a wrong way.
For this particular car, some cars it may not matter how it goes on, but this particular vehicle, there's definitely a right and a wrong way. It's the attachment posts here are off center to the weather strip. So you need to refer to the instructions that come with it or some type of a manual to tell you this is the right way to put it on. So,
Friction fit on
yep.
your posts.
Friction fit, there's little barbs in there that hold it. So as this thing goes in, it's a two-step process really. We're gonna push all these things in, and then we're actually gonna go back and put a little weather strip adhesive in between each one of them. So we start on the bottom. You always want the seam on the bottom. And if you can reach it inside, it really is better, easier if you can just grab hold of that with the pliers.
Better to pull than to push. So it's
Yeah.
what we're avoiding here is there'll be some of these that we have to tap in place because you can't reach in up on the window trim. But the problem with that can be if you tap it incorrectly, you can actually snap the head of that plug. And once it's broke, it's broke. So pulling from the inside can work better than tapping from the outside.
If you get hold of it. So that one
Happy
pulled
as a
in.
clam?
And here again, the theme of the whole story here is be patient. You start reefing on it, the first thing that's going to happen is your hand's going to slip off and you're going to cut yourself on this sheet metal.
How do you know that?
I'm very experienced in cutting my hand on sheet metal. Yeah. Now some of these we aren't going to be able to grab hold of because there's going to be some interference, but we'll get to that.
The other solution.
The other solution.
Well, even Brent can't get this plug to go in. So now we get the opportunity to show you in cases where you can't pull and you got to push. So let's pivot this so you can see what we're seeing. Hang on, I'm on my weather strip. There we go. All right, doctor.
Okay, so you can see this end, but what you can't see on the other end is it's a T. It goes about this far out. So you need something fairly large to get a hold of it so you don't fall off the end of it.
So we want to spread that driving pressure over a greater area.
So we're going to take that right there and just tap.
Well, so here's the story, Morning Glory. We're going to keep going with this weather strip all the way around.
Sorry.
I'm trying to talk. So you've had opportunities here to see both approaches. One is we're going to pull some of those in. Others, we're going to tap where we have to tap. Clearly up here around the door, there's a lot of areas where they're going to have to be tapped in place because you don't have the opportunity to pull them. Once we get back around the bottom, we'll come back and we'll have a look at putting the weather strip adhesive on. And there's also another weather strip component we've got to get on the door. We'll show you that in just a little bit. It's so nice when they just make that little noise right there, when they pull right in. Got some skizzers?
I do.
Nice job.
Okay.
All right, a little glue to finish the job.
Yep, and then what we'll do, now this stuff is really messy. So be careful. A little bit goes everywhere, it seems like. So we're gonna glue up the seam, and then in between each one of those, we're just gonna put a little shot of this. So the first thing we're gonna do, we got some masking tape here. Did that just matter? We'll put a little bit there, get that in the right position. Good?
Yes, sir.
All right, then just in between each one of those,
just a little bit of that.
And that process is going to continue all the way around. But we've got another piece of trim, another piece of weather strip that's got to go over here that we want to show you. And then we'll go back and finish up that adhesive work. So Brent, you've had a hard time finding the perfect fasteners for this, and not had a hard time finding them in your garage.
No.
But had a hard time finding them anywhere in the world.
There's little plastic rivets. Well, they're a little plastic head on a little cross piece that go in through these holes and hold this in place. I'm still looking, but yeah, I haven't been able to locate them as of yet. So for now, we're going to put weather strip adhesive on because all this gets glued with weather strip adhesive here. And then we'll just tape it down until the adhesive dries. And then there's supposed to be those 2 rivets here. But we're just going to use some Tech screws that I've got to hold it in
customized.
place. Yeah, it's custom. There's plenty of clearance in there for the head of the Tech screw. That's one thing. When you change stuff, well,
Make sure it's going to
make
work.
sure it's going to work. Yeah, yeah. So we're going to put a little adhesive on the back of that. And what this is a hinge seal, and this is specific to this car. I mean, there's other cars that have hinge seals, but you know, the 1955, 56, 57 Chevys had this particular one. So it's all going to be a little different. And that just goes right there, and then right along that edge. Yep. I'm going to put these in to hold it in place down here. More goop down there.
Happy as a clam?
Looks good. As soon as that dries, we can pull the tape off there, and then I'm just going to keep going along here, putting a little bit in between each one of those hold downs. Should be ready to put glass in. Well, the weather stripping's all on. It's time to install the door glass. It's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, but we'll get to that in a second. This is the door glass. It's a new piece of glass. The old piece that was in here was actually cracked right down the center, so I took that old piece out, took it to a local glass company, and they just cut me a new piece of glass. So that's a new piece. I'm going to set that off to the side. We're going to put that in a second. A couple of the other parts that are going in, this is a window regulator. These can be replaced, but this one worked fine, so we're just going to put it right back in. Vent window and a vent window regulator. And like I say, it's a jigsaw puzzle, so you have to put the regulator in first, then we have to put the door glass in, then we have to get the track, the regulator in the track on the door glass. So I'm going to go ahead and install the regulator. We're just going to set that down into the door so it's in there. Then I'm going to take the glass and slide that into place. Come on. Now I can take the regulator that's in there and actually hook that into the track on this window. Now we take the vent window . All right, I'll just take a couple screws and hold that into place. All right, I'm just going to put 2 in there for now. Now, one thing I did to this window track before we put the window in was took a little lithium grease. I'm going to go ahead and spray this track. And we'll install this track on the regulator. All right. That goes here. And then we got 4 screws that hold the regulator up here. And you got to get the window in the right spot to get those holes to line up, because wherever this thing, the window crank was at that point, is where the window needs to be for that all to line up. And then what we want to do is put the vent window regulator on. Well, I got 2 more screws to put in the front of the vent window. And then this thing is ready. I'm going to get George back here. We're going to actually hang this door.
Brent, it's kind of cold in there. We should put a door on there so we can get a little heat in there.
Yeah.
Ready to put a door on the car now, and this is something that it's good to have an extra pair of hands with. We don't have a specific door jack, but we do have our friend jack, floor jack. So here's what we've done. We've got a sandbag on the floor jack. The door is cradled onto the sandbag. That's going to help us just kind of position everything. But then we'll walk you through the process of actually getting the door properly aligned to the body so that everything is going to work just right. So I've got the door, and I really do have it. You can trust me. And you got to go up probably another 4 inches. What we want to do initially here is just get the hinges into where they got to go. All right, just stop there. And now let's do a little lateral. Okay, take me up another inch. A little more up. Quit there. And I can't really see. Why don't you scoot around? And what we want to do is just get a couple of bolts in here to pin everything in. What we're trying to do here is just get a bolt, here, take that one, would you? Into each hinge to start with. So tell me what you need, Brent. And this is where
Right there. Let's try that.
somebody out here to be manipulative, somebody inside to tell you what motion you need to make is the way to do this. The holes that the bolts are going through in the hinge are oversized. So there's quite a bit of wiggle room on this, and that's what allows the adjustment to get it aligned to the body.
All right, that one's started. The bottom one here. All right, 2
All
started.
right, good. So now here's what we can do. Let the jack down gently close the door, and then we'll work on positioning, which is getting the frame of the door in the right spot relative to the body itself.
Ready?
Born ready, just need a chance.
And I dropped the bolt. Well, let's get it from there. It's the weather
we're
strip.
pretty close. What I'm looking at here is the gap between the top of the door and the bottom of the gutter, in the case on this car. And then also on the body itself, there's this high spot right here. I want to get these lined up as best I can. And one of the things we're finding is that even though the hinges are loose, I'm basically at the top of the travel I can get because of the location of the striker plate on the door jamb. So similarly, those striker plate screws can be loosened and the whole striker can come up. So Brent's gonna give us a hand here and move that striker plate for us. Because those screws are also in oversized holes.
So we need to go up a little
I think up a little
and out a little.
and maybe out a little. Oh yeah,
Whoa, that's too much.
maybe. Let's
Now we'll
see. All right, then we'll get the door closed and we'll try it all over again. Now we'll close that in the new position, and that is much better. If you look at our body part right there, we're in pretty good alignment. So, Brent,
How's the gap up front here?
from a front to back perspective, I'd say we are pretty good.
Okay, so I can tighten these all the
You
way up?
can tighten them all the way, and then we'll see if we get any sag when it comes off of there. Now he's got those secure. What do you think, Brent? Still awake?
Yeah, looks good from in here.
It took us it took us a lot of futzing around to get this just right. We moved the striker plate a couple times. Once we had the striker plate adjusted, we could close the door all the way, get the fit finalized, so we got that gapicity right where we wanted it, getting the body flush this way, getting the gap between the door and the body exactly the way we want it. Brent, give us a window close. Oh my gosh, this is just coming along so cool. So again, our prevailing theme here, it takes patience, a little bit of trial and error to get the window in and the door hung. But once it's done, boy, does that look great. It pays to take your time, make sure you get those gaps just right and the operation of the door just right. You want to come out and have lunch, or are you just fixing to stay in there?
I'm hungry.
All right. We got the door all set. We're ready to move on. Brent, these fenders really look great. There's only one way they're going to look better.
Ooh, if it's on there.
On the car.
Yeah.
All right, so we're here to tell you about hanging a fender. And we don't mean a guitar, we mean a car fender. So, a couple things. You tell me what you need. So he's dropping the flange on his end down where it has to go, like that. Now, on Brent's end, at this point, these first couple bolts, there's not a lot of wiggle room because they just kind of go where they go. But what's going to make this thing work as far as alignment goes, so it looks good on the body, is a big oversized hole here in the top of the fender. It's about a 3/4 inch hole through which we're going to put a 3/8 inch bolt, so there's quite a bit of wiggle room. There's a similar hole down under the bottom, so that can get manipulated as well in order to get all the parts aligned. Now, this is a great tip that Brent's doing, but we're not talking about yet, which is he's using a tapered pin in one hole in order to get alignment on the next hole. So a lot of times, as you try to manipulate these parts, you can't quite get the bolts in where they're supposed to go. So by using a tapered pin through the holes, you can get everything to line up. Then you can start getting a bolt in there.
And you definitely don't want to get anything too tight because all these holes are just a little bit seems like they're always just a little bit off.
What we're looking at now is how the top of the fender comes across the top of the door. And these actually, just as they sit here, these are really good. If they're not, then what we can do is add shims to the equation. So these shims are U-shaped. So as a result, the bolt can be in place. We could raise the fender just a little bit, slide the shim between the fender bracket and the top of the body. The shims being shims, that means they're all different thicknesses. So we can adjust accordingly in order to get the body to lay exactly where we want it to, so everything lines up just right. But incredibly, lucky guy that you are, these look pretty good.
How's the gap?
Well, I'm pushing on it just a little bit, so.
Okay.
So what Brent's asking about now is using the wiggle room that we have in that big diameter hole. I can slide this way forward, or if I just let it relax, it comes back. So sequence of events is really important. We hung the door first, or we hanged the door first. What did we do first? We put the door on.
We put the door on, yeah.
And then, once the door is on, we came to the fender. Now we're going to set the fender to the door, checking this gap as we go so that it's uniform as we work our way down. And if I had the right ratchet, or you did, I think we could put some snugicity on this bolt. Then keep in mind that we've got an oversized hole down here at the bottom of the fender, just like at the top. So we'll be able to pull that in and then control its position this way. And then also do this to control its position this way so that we can control the gap and keeping these in plane, the fender and the door in plane. So really, Brent, this one went on really well.
Yeah,
Didn't take a lot of messing around.
Sometimes you got to shim the front, shim the bottom. I mean, this one did actually go on really well. So we got lucky.
But again, on your particular vehicle, be patient, use the shims as needed, take time to get everything aligned just right, and the car's going to look great when you're done. What do you got left to do here?
Just tighten up 2 bolts here, and then we got to put a couple in underneath under the fender and the inside. Good to go. The oil system's all primed up. Now we're ready to actually turn the motor over, get it up on #1 cylinder, and install the distributor. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a piece of chalk. I'm going to mark that timing mark because they do get awfully hard to see. And then take a ratchet there, put it on the bolt that holds the harmonic balancer in place, and we're going to turn this motor over. Now the spark plugs are out of this, so you're not fighting compression as well as fighting the resistance of the bearings. Makes it a little easier to turn it over. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. And what I'm watching for is #1 intake valve. That needs to be open as the flywheel comes around. So when that's open and it comes back up on 0, then I know #1 cylinder is ready, is going to fire right then. So I'm going to get that on here. And I can see my timing mark and I can see my timing grid. So we're just going to turn that over till we get up to 0, and then you see that intake valve is moving. So I know we're coming up on #1. So now I just need to bring that timing mark around to 0, and they'll be ready to drop that distributor down in there. All right, there, I got the timing mark set on 0. The #1 intake valve is open. It just closed, so I know #1 is firing. So I'm going to grab the distributor. And looking in the manual, #1 points about right here. So I'm going to go ahead. The way this distributor is set up, on the cam there's a gear just like this, matches up to this. So you have to actually back this off a little bit, drop it in, and it'll twist in and follow the helix of that cam gear. So we're going to set that in there. I want to start about right there. All right, now it's dropped down in, but the oil pump drive rod hasn't dropped in yet. So what I need to do is keep turning that over until the oil pump, the drive rod drops in. And then what we'll do is we'll keep turning it around again one more time just to make sure that we got it. It's really easy to get one cog off on that, and that's gonna mess up your whole timing when you try to set this thing up. So I'm gonna keep turning this thing over, get that drive rod to drop in, then we're ready to just make sure everything is lined up right one time around. Then we'll put the cap on, put the carburetor on, put some wires on, and then we're ready to start this thing. All right, the oil pump drive rod engaged now, so this gap is closed up here, the distributor's all the way down. So now I'm gonna grab the cap, we're gonna set the cap on, and then we'll be ready to put a carburetor on. Now, distributor caps have a little tab here and a slot here, so there's only one way that they can go on. This particular cap has 4 screws that hold it on, some have clips. It's all vehicle specific. So this one, we're gonna go ahead and just drop that on. And we'll find there the notch, it locked into place. And then we'll take a screwdriver and lock those little L-shaped screws into place. And on this one, because this car was never designed to have a 350, it's really tight back there. Even though we moved the motor, it had 3/4 of an inch so we could put that HEI distributor in. It's really tight, so I gotta have a really small screwdriver to get back in here to get those. We'll get those locked on. They're all in, it's solid. I ran it around again to make sure it was on number 1 when I was coming up and it dropped in. So we are actually done with the distributor now. At this point, we're gonna go ahead and put the carburetor on, and then we can run some wires, and we're almost ready to fire this baby up. If you've ever tried to put a distributor in a Chevrolet 350, you know how difficult that distributor hold down bolt can be. This particular one, because there's nothing in the way, wouldn't be so bad, but if you've ever done it on a newer style, it's very difficult to get that bolt in place or loosened up to reset the timing. That's where a distributor wrench comes into play. It's specially designed. This particular kit had 2 different sizes, 1/2 inch and 9/16. It's got a 3/8 inch drive, so you put a ratchet on it when you get ready to snug that thing down completely. So what we'll do is I'll just show you how this thing works. Pretty self-explanatory, but now in newer style vehicles, there's just a ton of stuff here in the way. There's hoses, there's wires, there's vacuum lines, there's all kinds of stuff right in the way. You can see the bolt, but there's no way to get an actual wrench in there to get it. So we're gonna take a distributor wrench, and it just fits right down underneath the distributor, goes on the bolt, and then take your ratchet, lock it into that square drive, and you can tighten it, loosen it, whatever you need to do, whatever point you're at in timing this vehicle. You want this one, we're not going to snug it down too tight because we still do need to do the timing, but we'll come back later and we'll actually use this thing down to tighten it down completely. So the next time you're working on at least a Chevrolet 350 where it's very difficult to get at that distributor hold down bolt, a universal distributor wrench is a good tool to have in your toolbox. The next step on the old Chevy here is to put the carburetor on. Now we chose the Edelbrock brand carburetor. There's several different makes, manufacturers of carburetors. It's all based on personal preference. We just felt this one was going to match best with the valve covers we put in, the cam that we put in, and the parts that we were using already. So there's no real magic to it. There's 4 bolts that hold it on. There's different connections, different hoses, different wires to different carburetors. This particular carb has an electric choke. Some carburetors have a heat-sensitive choke with a little heat spring in there that actually actuates the choke. Some of them are vacuum operated, some of them are manual. So it all depends on what you have. The newer vehicles don't even have chokes or carburetors, they're all fuel injected. Now if we wanted to, we could actually put a fuel injection system in here, but just because time, money, I mean, everything comes into play, you know, they do get kind of expensive. So we're putting the carburetor on. So I'm gonna go ahead and install it. I got a base gasket on the bottom of the carburetor. Just going to line up the holes there. Now carburetors are generally made out of aluminum or real soft pot metal, so you got to be really careful. Check the manufacturer's specs for torque ratings because you can bend the base of the carburetor, so you want to be real careful. We're getting about 10 pounds on here, which is all I can get with my hand right up tight to the ratchet head there. Now we've got a linkage here. It's going to go in there. It's held on with a washer and a cotter key. Here again, there's different kinds of linkages. Some of them snap into place. Some of them have bolts, screws that hold it into place. Some of them have a little ball and knuckle. So we got the return spring here. Get that hooked up. Now we got a fuel line somewhere. Oh, there it is. PCV valve. Now this is part of the pollution control system. The crankcase has to breathe, and what this does is keeps the contaminants and stuff from getting into the oil. It just recirculates them back into the carburetor. So that gets plugged in there, maybe. Plug our choke in. And the last thing we're going to plug in is the vacuum advance to the distributor. Now that vacuum advance is going to have to come off again when we do the timing on the distributor, but it's a good place to store the hose, obviously, so you don't lose it. So this carburetor is ready to get fuel put to it. We just got a couple more things and we're ready to try it out. Well, I'm down to installing the last plug wire on the 56 here, and what we started with was universal plug wires, which means we actually had to lay them in there, measure them to length, cut the ends off, and then crimp a new end on there. I've already laid this one in there and measured it, so now I'm just ready to crimp a new end on. So what I'm going to do is very, very carefully, so you don't cut into that conductor, take my wire stripper and pull the end off to expose the conductor. And then there's a little bit of fuzzies there that we're just going to take a razor blade here and trim off. So now I've got our conductor exposed. We fold that over, take our end. We'll use my strippers to start it. And then what I'm going to use is a ratchet and crimp tool. This is a handy tool to have in your toolbox. You can set it, gives you a lot more torque. It gives you a very, very precise setting on any crimps that you're making. So what we'll do is we'll set that in here. Then we can ratchet that down. Now we've got a nice crimp on the end of that wire. So now we take the boot, spray it with a little, I'm using electronic cleaner. Silicone spray would work. You can use dielectric grease on the boots if you need to. But we're just going to spray that a little bit, get it to slide over. Make sure that the plug wire end comes all the way into the end of the boot, and I can see it in there. So this is actually ready to install. Now one of the things you need to check, double check, even triple check is the firing order of the engine. Every engine is different, so you need to check the manual, check the internet, check wherever you got to check to find the right firing order. Sometimes if you're not using an aftermarket intake, the firing order will be stamped right on the intake, but make sure you get the firing order right because that'll really mess you up when you go to try and start it. And speaking of trying to start it, I'm going to install this. I'm going to go find George and we're going to try and start this baby. Now one of the reasons we went with the universal kit is so we could cut them to fit so there wasn't extra ones, because you can buy plug wires specific to a 350 engine, but they're going to be a little bit long here and a little bit short here, so you're not going to get a nice perfect tight clean fit in here. And we wanted this to look really nice when we got done. So there's also, we're using standoffs here off the valve covers to hold it out away from the headers, and we're using little clips to hold these wires together down inside down next to the valve cover. So I'm gonna go ahead and snap this one on and we're gonna, all right, I think we're ready. I'm gonna find George and we're gonna see if we can't start this baby up. We've got this engine pretty much ready to start the final assembly point, but one big thing that you need to do is prime the oil system. It's often overlooked. A lot of guys will just use the starter to do it, but if you do that, you're actually turning the engine over, turning all the bearing surfaces over to try and get oil to those bearing surfaces that you want to protect. So a better way to do it is to use an oil pump. I mean, it's just a drive tool is all it is, because the oil pump in this case drives off the distributor. You can buy a special tool like that. Mine that I have right here, it was 1985. I was in high school shop class, and we had an engine about to this point, and the shop instructor came by and said, "Did you prime the oil system?" And we all looked at each other and said, "Did we what?" So he said, "You got to prime that oil system or you're going to burn up some bearings, or you could burn up some bearings." So I said, "Well, how do you do that?" And he said, "Go down and talk to the motor shop, see if you can get the special tool that you need to turn that oil pump without turning anything on the engine." So I went down to the motor shop, and he had a tool that looked similar to this. It wasn't this exact one, but he said, "You can buy one, but it's like $20. And that was 1985. That was a lot of money back then. So anyway, he said, "Just take an old distributor, cut the top off, drive the gear off, and use that." And I said, "Well, I have an old distributor because we put an Excel distributor system in that particular car." So I went home that night, got my old distributor, took it back to shop class the next day. We drove the pin out and knocked the gear off and took a hacksaw and cut the top off. So almost 30 years later, I still have it, welded a nut on there so we could drive it with an air tool. So anyway, what we're going to do with this is we're going to drop it down into the distributor hole, and we're going to put an air wrench on there and just spin it up. And then just for this, I mean, the only reason we did this, put this gauge in here, we put an oil pressure gauge in here, just so we can make sure we got oil pressure going everywhere it needs to go. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that thing in there and spin it up. And we'll be able to watch the gauge. So that'll drop in. Okay, so we're in there. I'll just take an air wrench. There we were getting about 10 pounds of oil pressure, so I know the oil's moving through this thing. I'm going to go ahead and run this for about 15 seconds or so just to make sure oil gets everywhere it needs to go. And then I'm going to pull that out and we'll be ready to drop the distributor in.
Well, honest to Pete, Brent is like a 16-year-old who's got a date with the cutest girl in the high school. He can't wait to put a key.
Both cutest girls.
He's pretty excited about turning the key and hearing these horses run. So everybody here is, from me to the rest of the camera crew. So we have to do a couple things here. Carburetor is brand spanking new, which means it's bone dry. In order to get a little gas in the carburetor, we've got Dave's grandpa's oil can here. There's a can that's about 60 or 70 years old, pert near the same age as the car, so that's probably good
fitting.
luck. Yeah, we're gonna just open up the carburetor, get a little bit of gas in there. All right, Doctor, you want to try her?
I'm ready. You ready?
What's the worst that could happen?
Clear.
It's a good sign.
That's cool.
It's very cool.
That's cool. Okay, let me see if it'll pick up. Okay, so we're
I'm going to
just
give you a little help.
No, we're just filling the bowl in the carburetor. Okay,
Now, however,
yeah, the timing's definitely off a little bit, so we got a timing light set up already on it, hoping it would just fire right up like it did.
so we got to work on the timing, but we also need to say that sometimes it doesn't start on the first try. You know, there's a big back trail here of putting a lot of different parts together. So Brent, in the category of things that can go wrong at this point, give us a little bit of a litany here.
Like I mentioned on spark plug wires, if you have the firing order wrong, it may fire, it may pop, it may run a little bit, but it's not going to run right. It's very easy on these, you know, if you're not paying close attention to the number one valve when you're turning that thing over, You can easily put the distributor in 180 degrees off, and then it's just going to pop through the carburetor. You could have maybe a bad connection somewhere, so there's not getting power to the distributor.
Think of all of the wiring that we went through to get this baby back together. So it's pretty easy to have stuff, even with the good color coding and everything being labeled. It's fairly easy to have a bad connection someplace, especially when you go from brand new wire to a 1956 connection someplace.
You could forget to plug a wire in.
Who would have done?
I'm just saying, you could.
Okay, now one of the things, we did start the car, so we've got the garage door behind us open because of course we're running inside an environment here where we want to have ventilation. We're also running an exhaust fan, so we're drawing in clean air and drawing out the exhaust fumes. Very important part to remember so we can enjoy the car and not pass out.
Yeah.
All right, what's your pleasure, buddy?
I'm going to start it. We'll set the timing and take it for a test drive. Clear?
Hit it. Yeah, timing's off a little bit.
Now what we wanted, we checked the manual for this particular engine, the way it's set up, we wanted 8 degrees before top dead center. So we set that to 8 degrees.
And?
One of the things you need to do is you need to disconnect the vacuum advance on the distributor and plug the vacuum port coming from the carburetor. So now when this thing revs up, the vacuum advance will plug all that back in, and it actually advances the timing a little bit more when you're stepping on it. So I'm going to snug that distributor down. We're going to check it one more time, throw a hood on it, and back it out for the first time today. Well, not today.
Very cool though, we got the engine running. Congratulations, buddy.
All right, thanks.
Let's button her up. All right, here's what we did. The first time we put the hood on, we very gently brought it down toward the chassis so that we could check the alignment between the hood and the body. And we had to do a fair bit of messing around to get it where we wanted. Then raise the hood up again. The protocol is the same as what you've already seen, which is the bolts that secure the hood go through oversized holes in the hinges. That allows some wiggle room. So we've got some adjustments to go still, but
I'm dying to take it for a test.
it's enough that we can close the hood.
Closed.
Brent can get it on the road. So Brent, great job on this vehicle.
Thanks for your help.
It really looks good. It sounds good. Hope you've enjoyed the information we've brought to you on the 56 Chevy. Hood is closed. The 56 Chevy is closed.
You talk, I'm leaving.
All right. Hope you enjoyed this. Get out there and spin a wrench.